When a journalist mocked Barron Trump at a charity gala, no one expected his calm response to make everyone fall silent. The first thing one noticed upon entering the grand lobby of the Fairmont Grand Hotel was the distinctive hush that settled across the marble floors. Even before stepping into the ballroom, guests were greeted by stately arches and towering pillars, reminiscent of an old-world palace. Warm, golden lighting illuminated ornate wall moldings and oil paintings that stretched nearly to the domed ceiling. Expensive perfumes mingled with the faint scent of fresh roses arranged in tall crystal vases, giving the space a luxurious yet welcoming aroma. Moving from the lobby toward the ballroom, attendees found themselves gently guided by staff in perfectly pressed uniforms. Discreet signage directed everyone to the evening's highlight, the annual charity gala meant to benefit children from low-income families. Each year, this event brought together some of the most powerful figures across industries. Business moguls with philanthropic ambitions, movie stars who made headlines for their activism, and journalists perpetually seeking compelling stories to fill their columns. The implicit promise was always the same. By purchasing an extravagant table or donating during the auction, those with means could make a significant impact on young lives. The ballroom's grand entrance. As guests passed through the enormous double doors that led into the ballroom, they were greeted by a sight so breathtaking it made many pause for a moment to take it all in. Plush red carpets with intricate gold patterns lined the floor. Overhead hung 3 magnificent crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, sparkling in tiers that cascaded from the high ceiling. The lights refracted into gentle rainbow hues that danced on the polished surface of the floor, creating a subdued, dreamlike glow. Tables draped in satin tablecloths were arranged in concentric circles around a raised stage. Each centerpiece was a showstopper of its own. Tall arrangements of white orchids, lilies, and garden roses stood in handcrafted vases. Tiny candles floated in glass bowls, creating a glimmer around each table setting. Rows of glittering utensils, fine china, and embossed place cards hinted at the gastronomic wonders that would follow. The event's organizers, having learned from past galas, had arranged multiple refreshment stations near the ballroom's perimeter. There, bow-tied servers poured champagne and offered amuse-bouches, miniature concoctions of caviar, mousse, and exotic vegetables plated on silver trays. A string quartet in one corner played soft renditions of classical pieces, ensuring the mood stayed elegant and poised. A galaxy of influential attendees. By the time the clock neared 8, the room was abuzz with conversations. Prominent figures from the business world like Jonathan Wexley, CEO of a renewable energy conglomerate, and Ada Nelson, a venture capitalist known for backing innovative charities, were exchanging pleasantries. Both had reputations for big donations and even bigger opinions, making them staples at events like this. From Hollywood arrived beloved actor Samuel Chambers, accompanied by his co-star and close friend Alicia Rhodes. Chambers, a versatile performer known for his comedic and dramatic range, was known to attend charity galas regularly, not just for publicity, but because he genuinely believed in supporting social causes. Rhodes, on the other hand, was rumored to be on the cusp of producing her own documentary on disadvantaged youth, an endeavor that aligned perfectly with the gala's purpose. As they mingled, cameras flashed subtly in the background. Photographers from entertainment publications snapped pictures for the society pages. Journalists, too, circulated throughout the crowd, though they mostly carried themselves with discreet confidence. Many had come from major national outlets. Others were from niche magazines dedicated to philanthropy and high society. Among them, however, one name in particular drew sideways glances and hushed murmurs: Marcus Klein. Klein was neither the tallest nor the most flamboyantly dressed person in the room. In fact, he blended in somewhat. Of average height, sandy blonde hair, slicked back neatly, sporting a classic tuxedo with a simple black tie. But there was a magnetic quality to him, an aura that came from his reputation. Over the years, he had become notorious for acerbic wit and unapologetic commentary on political and cultural matters. His columns ran in a left-leaning publication with a vast online readership. Some lauded him as a fearless truth-teller. Others dismissed him as a provocateur who habitually crossed ethical lines for the sake of viral headlines. For this particular evening, Klein had been invited as the guest speaker, a decision that, as many whispered, was somewhat risky. The event organizers, led by a small committee of philanthropists and socialites, had reasoned that Klein's direct style and controversial angles could spur necessary conversations, to quote their press release. In their minds, a bit of provocation might lure a larger audience and, subsequently, more donations. Yet as soon as Klein's role was announced in the weeks leading up to the gala, tension rippled through the philanthropic community. People questioned the wisdom of handing the microphone to someone who could just as easily alienate donors with biting jokes as he could spur them into deeper reflection. Despite this, the committee held firm. They promised a speech that would shift perspectives and challenge the status quo, marketing it as the highlight of the night. While the influential and the inquisitive buzzed around the center of the ballroom, an 18-year-old quietly slipped into a seat at a table near the back. Barron Trump, tall and poised, did not make a grand entrance. Dressed in a well-tailored suit that subtly reflected the warm lights of the chandeliers, he looked every bit the image of a polished young man attending a formal event, but without the usual fanfare one might expect for a member of a famous family. He had come at the invitation of a close family friend, Alice Fordham, an art curator who had long supported children's charities. Alice had insisted that Barron attend, saying it would be an opportunity to see philanthropy in action and, she added slyly, to remind him there was more to life than swirling headlines. Having grown up under ceaseless public scrutiny, Barron often found large gatherings either intrusive or, frankly, dull. But because of Alice's genuine passion for charitable causes, he agreed to accompany her. Barron's decision to remain unnoticed was not happenstance. By design, he had chosen a table near the back, partly shielded by a large, ornate column. While others preened for the cameras, he contented himself with observing from his vantage point. Occasionally, a curious onlooker would recognize him, but a polite nod or a soft greeting from him was usually enough to end the encounter. He was no recluse. He just preferred quiet observation over the limelight. Sitting beside Barron was Alice, wearing a sophisticated but understated midnight blue gown. Around them sat a mix of guests, a semi-retired surgeon who spent her time volunteering at free clinics, a young tech entrepreneur determined to launch an educational app for underprivileged students, and a couple of educators invited to represent local schools benefiting from the gala's fundraising. This eclectic group, with backgrounds ranging from medicine to technology to the arts, reflected the broader purpose of the night, a shared desire to support children in need, even if each came from vastly different walks of life. Before any formal speeches began, the mood in the room was festively charitable. Laughter mingled with the gentle strains of cello and violin. But beneath that surface lingered a subtle tension, like a barely perceptible tremor. Many were keenly aware that Klein was on the program, slated to speak toward the latter half of the evening. His presence loomed in whispered conversations. Among those unsettled by the prospect was Ada Nelson, the venture capitalist. She was chatting with a longtime associate when she brought it up. "Let me be blunt. I believe in free speech, but not at the expense of humiliating donors," Ada said in a low voice. Klein revels in controversy. I've seen him lampoon people who were doing genuinely good work, just because he thought they were too privileged or hypocritical for his liking. Her associate shrugged. Yes, but maybe the committee wanted someone who'd ruffle feathers. Sometimes that spurs bigger donations. Everyone wants to prove they're not intimidated. From across the room, an organizer for the event, Lydia Sorensen, known for her ability to mediate the trickiest of situations, hovered near the edges, listening in on conversations and trying to gauge the overall mood. She'd spent countless hours securing the venue, coordinating with caterers, and recruiting high-profile guests. Now she found herself quietly worrying that the night's main attraction might overshadow the charitable purpose. "I just hope this doesn't turn into the Marcus Klein show," she muttered under her breath. At precisely 8:30, a gentle chime signaled that the night's formal program was about to commence. The The string quartet shifted seamlessly into a soft fanfare. Conversation subsided, and many took their seats. Others gathered closer to the stage, setting down half-finished flutes of champagne. A poised master of ceremonies, Diana Holmwood, made her way to the lectern. Clad in a flowing emerald gown, she welcomed the assembly with a gracious smile. "Good evening, esteemed guests," she began, her voice echoing gently through the ballroom sound system. "On behalf of the organizing committee, I'd like to extend our deepest gratitude for your presence here tonight. Your contributions will help us offer life-changing support to children in our city and beyond." A ripple of applause traveled around the room, accompanied by nods of agreement. Diana proceeded to outline the program. Introductory remarks, a short film showcasing the children and families who benefited from last year's donations, an interlude with the orchestra, and then the much-anticipated address by Marcus Klein. Barron listened attentively, hands clasped in his lap. Watching the short film projected onto a screen near the stage, he couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy for the children featured. Kids who didn't know if there would be a meal waiting for them at home or if they could afford simple school supplies. If nothing else, the footage reminded everyone why they had come here tonight. After the film, the lights came back up and the quartet's performance took center stage. A medley of familiar classical themes drifted through the ballroom, granting a moment of reflection. Servers took this opportunity to discreetly circle the tables again, filling empty glasses and whisking away used plates. At Barron's table, the surgeon turned to him. "That was quite moving, wasn't it?" she said, gesturing to the now blank screen. Barron nodded. "Yes, it's important to see the real people we're trying to help," he replied softly, keeping his words measured but sincere. Alice patted his arm gently. She was proud to see him engaging with the cause so openly. For all the controversies and media speculation about his family, Barron was still a teenager with a genuine heart. With the orchestral interlude drawing to a close, an almost tangible tension pulsed through the ballroom again. People leaned forward in their seats. This time, the hush was more profound, a concentrated silence that whispered, "He's up next." Diana returned to the lectern and offered a gracious smile to the audience. "And now, it is my honor to introduce a journalist whose thought-provoking columns and fearless commentary have fueled many a debate. Please welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Marcus Klein." Polite applause greeted him. He strode onto the stage, exuding the confidence of someone used to both accolades and criticism. The applause, though polite, was underpinned by cautious curiosity. How far would he go? Who would he target? Barron, who had momentarily let his gaze wander, now fixed his eyes on the stage. If he was anxious, he didn't show it. His expression remained neutral, almost serene, as though he was preparing himself for whatever storm might unfold. Standing at the lectern, Klein began with a disarming smile. "Good evening, everyone. For those worried I might burn this place to the ground with my commentary, don't fret. At least not yet," he quipped lightly. A ripple of laughter spread, albeit somewhat uneasy. He opened with anecdotes about the city's infamous traffic, referencing how even the wealthiest aren't immune to getting stuck in endless jams. He then recalled a comedic mishap from a past charity event, where 100 champagne glasses had come crashing to the floor, encouraging a mild wave of chuckles across the room. People began to relax, concluding that perhaps the controversy had been overhyped. But beneath that friendly preamble lay the promise of sharper edges. Klein was like a skilled fencer, deftly testing his audience with small jabs before unleashing any real thrusts. As he smoothly transitioned into commentary about politics and culture, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. Some listened intently, nodding in agreement when he made humorous but valid points about government bureaucracy. Others stiffened at remarks they deemed too scathing towards certain political figures. And then it happened. Klein let his gaze wander across the audience, as though searching for his next subject. The inevitable arrived when he began to speak of Donald Trump, referencing policies, public persona, and social media escapades. A few pockets of the ballroom tittered. Others fell silent. Barron remained still, observing. If he noticed the looks of concern from Alice or the nervous glances from the educators at his table, he gave no sign. Klein carried on with remarks that ranged from satirical to harsh, and the laughter in the hall grew sparser. The tension was thick, even for those who didn't particularly like Donald Trump. At a certain point, everyone recognized that mocking a person is one thing. Relentlessly harping on them in front of an audience that includes their friends, acquaintances, or even family is another. When Klein finally switched to Barron, an uneasy hush fell instantly, as though the entire room had sucked in a breath and forgotten to exhale. And let's not forget about Trump's most underrated contribution, his next generation. "Let's talk about Barron," he said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. At that moment, it felt as though time slowed down. Conversations, rustling, even the gentle clink of glasses against tables ceased. All eyes turned, almost by instinct, to the far table where Barron sat. He did not flinch. Marcus Klein's words about Barron were barbed with insinuations of a pampered upbringing and an aloof personality. A short, awkward burst of laughter erupted from a small cluster of guests, but it quickly died. Most people shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Barron remained utterly composed. When the journalist paused, letting his jab about growing up in a gilded tower hang in the air, Barron didn't move a muscle. He looked almost statuesque, his face unreadable. It was at once eerie and impressive. Then came that elongated silence. Seconds ticked by. You could almost feel the tension pressing down on everyone, a shared unease that made someone shrink into their seats. Klein, perhaps sensing he'd stepped too far, or expecting a reaction, cleared his throat. "Tough crowd," he muttered. Still no one laughed. The hush continued, so palpable you might have heard the faint rustle of the table linens. Across the ballroom, cameras and smartphones were discreetly raised. Whatever was about to happen, people wanted to capture it. And just then, Barron moved. Slowly and deliberately, he pushed his chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the marble echoed through the stunned silence. He stood, a motion so measured it was as if he had rehearsed it. His tall frame projected a quiet strength, and every person in the room seemed to hold their breath. With calm steps, he made his way toward the stage, each footstep echoing. Klein, who'd projected confidence throughout his speech, visibly faltered. Gone was the smug grin. In its place, a mask of uncertainty. Barron reached the edge of the stage, paused, and looked Klein squarely in the eye. "Thank you for sharing your perspective," he said, his voice low but resonant enough to carry through the room. A collective intake of breath followed. It was not the retort many expected. There was no anger, no wounded pride, no flustered offense. Yet it hit harder than any shouted comeback might have. Barron went on, explaining how he'd observed people constructing narratives about him for years, how he understood it was part of public life. But then he spoke of respect and the importance of remembering the human being behind every headline. His voice never rose above a poised and steady register. This only amplified the power of his words, as if each syllable penetrated the atmosphere more deeply because it was spoken calmly. By the time Barron concluded with a call for empathy and unity, the crowd was hanging on every word. A final remark, "I hope this gives you something to think about," landed with the kind of gravity that ripples outward in waves. Then he turned and walked back to his table, leaving a dead silent room in his wake. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. Klein remained at the lectern, frozen. Then, almost tentatively at first, applause began. A few scattered claps near the back, followed by more and more until it thundered. People rose from their seats, the ovation rolling through the ballroom in an overwhelming wave. Some guests wore expressions of amazement. Others seemed relieved that someone had finally drawn a line, calmly, logically, yet with undeniable strength. Barron sat down again, nodding politely at the astonished faces around him. If he felt any surge of pride, he kept it hidden. He returned to the poised young man who had remained inconspicuous all evening, except now, no one could ignore him. For a brief but powerful moment after Barron Trump returned to his seat, the room remained suspended in tension. Marcus Klein stood at the lectern, still gripping its edges with white knuckles. Unaccustomed to being upstaged, he looked as though he were rapidly cycling through possible reactions in his mind. The applause continued to swell, resonating off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Eventually, Diana Holmwood, the master of ceremonies, realized that no one else was going to make a move. In a few measured steps, she joined Klein on stage, tapping lightly on a microphone to bring the focus back. As the ovation began to fade, she offered a gracious, steady smile to the audience. "Let's have one more round of applause," she said, voice clear and poised, "for both our guest speaker, Marcus Klein, and this evening's extraordinary reminder from Mr. Barron Trump." The applause, softer this time, offered everyone a way to ease out of the emotionally charged moment. Klein appeared relieved by Diana's intervention. He mumbled a quick, "Thank you," into the mic, then exited the stage with an uneasy gait, making his way to a side door where a few other journalists waited, wearing expressions of mingled curiosity and sympathy. With the keynote speeches concluded, the scheduled portion of the program gave way to an intermission before the charity auction. Attendees began to stand, stretch, and gather in clusters to compare reactions. A throng of society reporters and social media influencers, armed with smartphones and digital cameras, hurried to the edges of the ballroom where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest, eager to upload videos of the exchange. Alice Fordham discreetly touched Barron's arm. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laden with concern and admiration. She knew Barron was composed, but that composure had its limits, especially when it came to personal matters like his family. Barron offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," he replied. "I said what I needed to say." Alice exhaled, relieved. She still marveled at how naturally Barron had seized that fraught moment. She glanced around, noticing how almost every table nearby was now casting glances in Barron's direction, not with scorn, but with a kind of newfound respect. She could tell that he, while not basking in the attention, was aware of it. Meanwhile, at the far side of the ballroom, Ada Nelson, the venture capitalist, sipped her champagne thoughtfully. Turning to her associate, she remarked, "Well, that was unexpected. The kid handled himself better than most seasoned adults I've met. No shouting, no nervous fidgeting, just calm." And he left Klein speechless. Her associate, a tall man with silvering hair named Roger Banfield, nodded. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Marcus Klein is infamous for cornering people and making them snap. Barron did the opposite. He neutralized him." Samuel Chambers, the Hollywood actor, was also in deep conversation with his co-star and friend, Alicia Rhodes. They had been standing near a towering floral arrangement, eyes still on Barron's table. "I didn't even know Barron Trump would be here tonight," Alicia said softly. Samuel shook his head. "Me neither. But I'll tell you, I've seen some intense confrontations in this business. Directors going head-to-head with producers, journalists with actors. Rarely do I see someone handle a provocation that gracefully." Alicia smiled in agreement. "Graceful, that's the word." Behind the scenes, Lydia Sorensen, one of the key organizers, had rushed backstage to catch Marcus Klein before he left. She found him pacing beside a velvet curtain, a glass of water trembling in his hand. "Marcus," Lydia said gently, trying to keep her voice neutral. She, like many, was torn between wanting to maintain a cordial relationship with him. After all, his name had drawn many eyes to this gala, and feeling unsettled by the tension he had stirred. He managed a half-smile. Yes, I know I probably went too far," he admitted, words spilling out quickly. "But you know me, I push boundaries. That's why you invited me, isn't it?" Lydia hesitated. "We invited you for a thought-provoking speech, not personal attacks," she replied, her tone measured. She glanced around to be sure no one else was listening. "Listen, we raised a lot of money tonight, and I appreciate your presence." But before she could continue, Marcus lifted his palm in a sign of surrender. "I hear you. I do. I'll be making a statement later. I never intended to drag the spotlight away from the actual cause, believe it or not." Lydia studied him, attempting to discern sincerity in his expression. He looked tired now, deflated even, like a balloon that had lost half its air. After a moment, she offered a nod. "All right. Thank you, Marcus." With that, she pivoted on her heel, heading back out to the ballroom where the auction was about to begin, leaving Marcus there to mull over the fallout of his remarks. Diana Holmwood soon took the stage again, this time accompanied by Robert Lindley, a renowned auctioneer whose rich baritone and theatrical flair made him a fixture at high society events. He wore a tuxedo with a gold-hued vest and carried a polished wooden gavel that glinted under the chandelier lights. The items up for auction were as extravagant as one might expect at such an event. Rare artworks, luxury vacations, and exclusive experiences like private cooking lessons with a Michelin-starred chef. The bidding started enthusiastically enough. A hush fell each time Robert called for higher offers, and small paddles rose sporadically from among the tables. Yet beneath the polite competition over art pieces and exotic vacations, there was a sense of lingering reflection. Barron's speech and the entire confrontation with Marcus Klein hovered in people's minds. Each time a hush settled, one could almost see guests whispering about the earlier moment, replaying it in their thoughts. As the auction progressed, a surprise donation arrived in the form of a handcrafted violin from a renowned Italian luthier, a last-minute item contributed by none other than Samuel Chambers himself. He rose to make a short remark about how the violin symbolized music's power to unite people from different backgrounds. The audience applauded warmly. Several hands shot up for the bidding, ultimately raising far more than the instrument's standard market value. From his seat, Barron watched with mild interest. His smartphone buzzed with notifications, but he silenced it after a cursory glance. He had no desire to see social media at that moment. He could guess what was happening there. Clips of his brief rebuttal posted with sensational captions, endless commentary from every corner of the internet. Alice leaned over, speaking softly. "You know, this is going to be in every newspaper by tomorrow, don't you?" Barron nodded, keeping his voice low. "Probably, but I didn't say anything I regret." Alice gave him a warm smile. "I know you didn't, and that might make all the difference." When the auction concluded with a spirited round of applause, Diana Holmwood again thanked everyone for their generosity. "We far exceeded our fundraising goals tonight," she announced, smiling broadly. "Your contributions will translate into real educational opportunities, nutritional support, and vital resources for underprivileged children and their families. Thank you for making that possible." The applause was genuine and heartfelt. Soon after, the formal portion of the evening wound down, and the guests began to circulate more freely, many finishing conversations they had started earlier. An upbeat jazz ensemble replaced the string quartet, offering a livelier musical vibe for those who wished to continue socializing late into the night. Barron stood to stretch his legs. Almost immediately, a few people approached him: Ada Nelson, Roger Banfield, and a couple of other philanthropists who had been seated together. Ada was the first to speak. "Barron," she said, smiling politely, "I just wanted to commend you on how you handled yourself tonight. Not many people, regardless of age, could have stayed so poised." Roger extended a hand. "Yes, well done, young man," he said, shaking Barron's hand gently. "Your remarks were a reminder that civility still has a place in our public discourse." Barron thanked them quietly, not wishing to linger on the matter. A part of him felt somewhat self-conscious about the sudden flurry of praise. For much of his life, he tried to avoid confrontations precisely because they drew attention he rarely found beneficial. Yet as more people came over with kind words, something in him relaxed. He realized that many in the room weren't merely praising a Trump or trying to curry favor with a famous name. They were genuinely moved by what had transpired, perhaps even enlightened by the notion that respect could trump provocation. Seeking a moment of peace, Barron excused himself from the crowd and made his way toward a tall set of French doors leading to a narrow balcony. Beyond the glass, a cool breeze ruffled the heavy velvet drapes. Barron stepped out, leaning against the ornate iron railing. Below, the city lights gleamed like reflections of the stars. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling the crisp night air. It felt good to be away from the swirl of chatter, if only for a moment. Mind if I join you? Startled, Barron turned to find Alicia Rhodes, the Hollywood actress, standing just inside the doorway. She offered a warm smile. Not at all, Barron said, stepping slightly aside so she could stand beside him. Alicia's shimmering black gown contrasted with the golden glow of the hotel's exterior lights. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. They watched the headlights and taillights weaving through the streets below. Finally, Alicia broke the silence. I want to say something, not as an actress, but as someone who's seen the media do its worst to people I care about. Barron glanced at her, curious but guarded. I admire your composure, Alicia continued. I've been in the public eye for nearly 15 years. I've faced gossip columns, paparazzi ambushes, and ruthless interviewers. But I'm an adult. I chose this life, more or less. You grew up in it without having a choice. Barron gave a small nod. He seldom discussed this aspect of his life openly, but it was true. He had never asked for the constant public gaze. I guess I just wanted to say, Alicia went on, that you made something very clear tonight. Being in the public, it doesn't mean one loses the right to dignity. And you reminded a lot of people of that. Thank you, Barron replied softly. Sometimes it feels like respect is treated as optional these days. It shouldn't be, Alicia said, her voice firm. And you demonstrated that in front of everyone. That took a lot of courage. Barron considered her words. He didn't entirely see it as courage, more like self-preservation. But he appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. They stood in companionable silence for another minute, letting the wind brush through their hair. At last, Alicia offered a gentle smile. Well, I should head back in. My co-star is likely to worry I've wandered off. Take care, Barron. You too. And thank you for, Barron paused, searching for the right phrase, being kind. Alicia's expression softened. She dipped her head in farewell, then turned and slipped gracefully back into the ballroom. While Barron found some solace outside, inside the ballroom, Marcus Klein had reemerged. After cooling down backstage and rethinking his approach, he decided he owed Barron a direct apology, if only to salvage his professional image. He approached Barron's table, only to find it empty. Spotting Alice Fordham, Klein ventured over. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "I was hoping to speak to Barron briefly. Is he still around?" Alice observed the journalist, noting the slight tremor in his voice. Maybe it was remorse, maybe embarrassment, or a calculated effort at damage control. In any case, she decided not to be discourteous. "He stepped out for some fresh air," she replied. "He should be back soon." Klein nodded, then glanced around the ballroom. "I suppose I can wait." Alice studied him for a moment. "Look," she said carefully, "I understand your brand is all about pushing boundaries. But there's a fine line between critical commentary and personal attacks, especially on family members who haven't chosen the spotlight." He swallowed. "You're not the first person to say that tonight. And you're right." Seeing that he was at least somewhat contrite, Alice nodded and gestured to an empty seat. "You're welcome to sit." Klein obliged, sitting down with a self-conscious exhale. It was ironic that he, a seasoned journalist, was now a loss for words. After a minute of scanning the ballroom, he spoke again, his tone quieter. "I've spent so long building a reputation for being unflinching and incisive. But I guess sometimes that bleeds into cruelty." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "And I'm truly sorry for that." Alice offered a faint smile. "Well, let's see what Barron has to say when he returns. He might surprise you." Meanwhile, on social media, the videos of Barron's calm takedown of Klein were spreading like wildfire. Millions of views poured in within hours. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag Barron Trump speech. Hashtag respect in public. Hashtag class over contempt. Commentators from across the political spectrum chimed in, many applauding Barron for showing maturity. Even those critical of his father expressed admiration for the way Barron handled himself. A well-known comedian tweeted, "No matter where you stand on the Trump family, you gotta admit, that was a classy move. Respect." A political pundit posted, "Barron Trump," reminding us that empathy cheap shots. Of course, not every comment was positive. Some users questioned the authenticity of Barron's composure, insisting it was a PR stunt orchestrated by handlers. But as often happens on social media, such voices were drowned out by the sheer volume of those discussing the powerful impact of a teenager's measured response. Back in the real world, the gala's atmosphere began to shift from tension to reflection. Many guests seemed to be rethinking their own approaches to public discourse. The educators at Barron's table were already discussing how they might use this moment as a teaching tool in their classrooms, a real-life example of how to respond to bullying, whether in person or online, with dignity rather than aggression. One of them, an elementary school principal named Marisol Perez, said excitedly, "We're always telling our students to use your words wisely when conflicts arise. Now, we have a real-world example, front and center." The other educator, a high school guidance counselor named David Lannister, agreed. Exactly. And it carries even more weight because these kids know who Barron Trump is. They'll be talking about it anyway. Might as well spin it into a lesson on respect and composure. When Barron returned from the balcony, he spotted Marcus Klein waiting at his table. Instantly, he knew what was coming. An attempt at an apology, maybe a quick handshake. He steeled himself internally, reminding himself of what he had just said on that stage, about empathy and the power of words to heal or hurt. Alice caught Barron's eye and gave him a gentle nod, as if to say, "He wants to speak to you." Barron walked over, hands calmly at his sides. Klein stood up. The two regarded each other in silence for a moment. The journalist spoke first, his voice subdued. "Barron, I owe you an apology. My remarks were out of line, especially given this was supposed to be about helping underprivileged kids, not about mocking anyone, least of all someone who never asked for the spotlight." Barron studied the man's face. Klein's posture was slightly stooped, his gaze uncharacteristically hesitant. Barron chose his response carefully. "I appreciate you saying that," he began, maintaining a measured tone. "I understand journalists have their angles, their opinions, but respect shouldn't be an afterthought. Tonight was meant to be about supporting a cause, not targeting individuals." Klein exhaled, relief visible on his face. "You're absolutely right," he admitted. "Sometimes I get caught up in my own narrative, forgetting that people's lives aren't just story material." They stood there a moment longer, an odd hush surrounding them despite the buzz of the event still in the background. Barron extended his hand. Klein shook it, the gesture symbolizing a brief but meaningful reconciliation. "I'm not looking for a fight," Barron said simply, looking him in the eye. "Never was." Klein managed a small, genuine smile. "Then neither am I." In that moment, both sensed a subtle release of tension, a letting go of the hostility that had nearly hijacked the gala's true purpose. It was a reminder that every person, no matter how public or private, deserves a measure of dignity. Not long after, guests began trickling out of the ballroom, some heading to the hotel's lavish lounges to continue networking over cocktails, others calling it a night. The grand space that had been bursting with chatter and conflict was returning to a more subdued ambience. Lydia Sorensen, exhausted but pleased with the overall success, circulated one last time to ensure everything was in order. She spotted Barron, Alice, and a few others preparing to leave. Approaching them, she smiled. "Thank you again, Barron," she said, sincerity evident in her tone. "I know things got tense, but in a strange way, it might end up drawing even more support for these children. People are talking about tonight, not just about what went wrong, but about the right message we should carry forward." Barron nodded. "I'm glad," he replied quietly. "The kids deserve every bit of help." Alice slipped her arm through Barron's, guiding him gently. "We should be going," she said, her voice warm with pride. "It's been a long evening, and you have schoolwork waiting for you." Barron chuckled softly, the normalcy of homework an amusing contrast to the extraordinary events of the night. "Right, let's not forget that." As they made their way to the lobby, numerous attendees took the chance to stop Barron and express admiration or offer their business cards, just in case he ever wanted to talk philanthropy further. Though he politely accepted each card, he knew he'd pass them to Alice for safekeeping. This wasn't his world, or at least, he hadn't intended it to be. But the evening showed that sometimes You don't choose the spotlight. It chooses you. Outside the hotel's grand entrance, valets were busy retrieving luxury sedans, limousines, and the occasional sports car. The crisp night air brushed against Barron's face, a refreshing reminder that life went on outside the swirl of paparazzi flashes and clinking glasses. A small group of onlookers had gathered, holding up phones, hoping to catch a glimpse of celebrities and high-profile guests. Some recognized Barron and called his name. A few camera shutters snapped. He offered a polite wave, but did not linger. Alice's driver pulled up in a sleek, black SUV. She and Barron climbed in, settling onto the plush leather seats. As the car pulled away from the opulent facade of the Fairmont Grand Hotel, Barron felt a deep sense of relief. The whirlwind of the evening was behind him, and though he had handled it with aplomb, he was glad to return to a space where he could be just himself. Peering out the window at the passing city lights, Barron replayed the night's key moments. He thought of the children whose stories had been highlighted in the short film, the generosity of the donors, and how all of it had nearly been overshadowed by one man's cutting remarks. Yet, in the end, respect had triumphed. And maybe that was the real story here. Empathy could still hold its ground against cynicism. He closed his eyes for a moment. Tomorrow, the media frenzy would be in full swing. He had no illusions about that. But for now, he let the rhythmic hum of the car lull him into a state of calm. Dignity is a choice, he reflected, one that needs to be renewed every day. The next morning dawned bright and crisp. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the townhouse where Barron Trump lived whenever he visited this particular city. He had slept in a guest suite, a spacious room with navy blue curtains and a mahogany desk cluttered with a few school assignments he'd yet to finish. It wasn't as grand as the towers he'd grown up in, nor the White House where he'd once resided, but it was comfortable and private, qualities he had learned to value deeply. His phone, plugged into its charger, buzzed on the nightstand. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Barron glanced at it, then sighed. Missed calls, countless text messages, and hundreds of notifications from every social media platform he had ever signed up for, and even some he hadn't. He switched the phone to airplane mode for now. He was supposed to meet Alice Fordham for breakfast downstairs. She had insisted on cooking for him, wanting to give him a homier experience than the typical five-star treatment he could easily receive. When Barron reached the kitchen, Alice was already bustling around in a casual sweater and jeans, chopping fresh fruit and whisking eggs. The aroma of coffee and toast made the atmosphere feel pleasantly cozy. "Well," she said, without turning around for the cutting board, "the media machine is in full swing, in case you couldn't tell." She tapped her own phone on the counter, a tablet next to it displayed a news site, with Barron's photo prominently featured. The headline read, "Barron Trump's poised rebuke to journalist sparks national conversation on respect." Barron braced himself. "I'm guessing it's wall-to-wall coverage," he said dryly, sliding onto a bar stool. Alice nodded, setting the bowl of fruit on the table. "Pretty much. Everything from viral clips on TikTok to op-eds in major newspapers. I've had at least a dozen reporters request interviews with you, some from highly reputable outlets, others from tabloids." Barron raised an eyebrow. "I'm not giving interviews." "I figured as much," Alice replied. She poured him a mug of coffee, then added, "But I think you need to be aware of the narrative forming around you. It's mostly positive right now, but you know how quickly that can change." Barron shrugged. "They'll move on when a news story pops up. Always do." Still, he couldn't deny the stirrings of curiosity. He'd seen many waves of publicity come and go around his family. Typically, he tried to stay uninvolved. Yet last night he had, in a way, stepped onto the public stage in his own right. He wasn't sure how he felt about that yet. As they ate breakfast, texts continued to roll in on Alice's phone. One in particular caused her to pause, reading it carefully. She looked up at Barron with a cautious smile. "This one's from Benjamin Ross. He's a close friend of your father's. Remember him? A political strategist." Barron nodded. He vaguely recalled seeing Benjamin at rallies and events during the presidential years, always hovering in the background with an earpiece and a phone that never stopped ringing. "What's he saying?" Alice squinted at the screen. "He says, 'Please tell Barron we're all proud of how he handled that situation.'" Remind him that the family is here if he needs anything. Barron took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. That's nice of him. He didn't elaborate. He and his father weren't exactly known for public displays of emotional closeness, and he had come to accept that. But it was still somewhat reassuring to hear that not everyone in his father's circle dismissed his actions. They finished breakfast in relative quiet. Barron excused himself to finally glance through a few headlines, turning airplane mode off on his phone and scrolling through the news. He skimmed quickly. A lesson in dignity from Barron Trump, an op-ed in a national newspaper. When the youngest Trump spoke, everyone listened, a popular celebrity blog. Marcus Klein issues formal apology, cites moment of poor judgment, a media watchdog site. Barron shut his phone again. It was overwhelming, but also oddly reaffirming. Many people, both supporters of his father's politics and staunch critics, were commending him. Across town, Marcus Klein was in his small office, located in a stylish co-working space in a revitalized industrial district. Large windows let in beams of morning sunlight, illuminating steel beams and exposed brick walls. Usually, this environment fueled his edgy columns with a sense of trendy urban grit. But today he felt off-kilter. Instead of starting his day as he normally would, breezing through emails, planning his next provocative commentary, he found himself drafting an article he never thought he'd write, a journalist's apology to a teen I undervalued. He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. In his mind, the memory of Barron's unwavering gaze replayed. The teen's calm rebuke, gentle yet firm, had made him question his own approach, something that rarely happened to Marcus. He had built an entire career on cutting remarks and strong opinions, with little regard for what he dismissed as collateral damage. Now, he was reckoning with the costs of that philosophy. He typed slowly. For years, I have prided myself on telling it like it is, whether at galas, in columns, or on podcasts. But last night, I realized there's a line between fearless honesty and callous arrogance. Barron Trump reminded all of us, that no matter our opinions, respect must remain a baseline. Marcus's eyes lingered on the blinking cursor. He had never felt comfortable showing vulnerability in his writing. But maybe it was time for a shift. With a resigned sigh, he continued typing, feeling both anxiety and an unexpected sense of liberation. Back in Alice's townhouse, Barron had moved to the living room, where soft sunlight lit up the taupe walls and modern art pieces. He was attempting to focus on a set of math problems for school when Alice walked in with a handful of envelopes and an expression of faint amusement. "These just arrived by courier," she announced, handing them over. Invitations. Several of them. Barron opened the first envelope, which turned out to be a gilded letterhead from a major daytime talk show. They wanted him as a guest to discuss the power of respectful discourse. Another envelope contained an invite to speak at a university's youth leadership conference. A third one, from a philanthropic foundation, asked if he would accept an honorary award for exemplary composure in public life. He set the letters aside. "I'm not a celebrity. This is getting ridiculous." Alice placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Your name is recognizable, and what happened last night was a compelling moment. People are intrigued. They see potential, someone with a known last name who doesn't act like the caricature they expect." Barron frowned slightly. "All I did was stand up and say a few words about respect." "Sometimes," Alice said gently, "that's all it takes to create a moment that resonates, especially in an era where everyone's yelling and no one's listening." Barron knew she was right. Still, the idea of stepping further into the spotlight made him uneasy. Part of him wanted to ignore every invitation and let the headlines fade. Another part wondered if there was an opportunity here to shift the conversation, to help the charities that were overshadowed by scandal and drama. Yet the latter idea came with the risk of further scrutiny, something he'd spent much of his life avoiding. In a cozy downtown cafe nestled between glass high-rises, a group of local college students had gathered. The cafe had an industrial chic vibe, exposed ducks reclaimed wood tables, potted succulents lining the windows. Over steaming mugs of coffee and plates of pastries, they discussed the gala and its aftermath. "I'm telling you, said Harper Chun, a political science major. Barron Trump's reaction at that gala is going viral on every platform. Even my apolitical friends are sharing the video. Across the table, Jonas Martinez, majoring in journalism, nodded. It's fascinating to see. Usually, any mention of Trump triggers a partisan meltdown. But this time, people on both sides of the aisle are saying, that kid's at a point. Their friend, Reena Patel, studying sociology, chimed in. It's a perfect storm for him. He's a public figure, like it or not. Yet he's always been quiet. So when he finally speaks, it's powerful. He's becoming a symbol of how we might disagree without dehumanizing each other. Harper leaned back in her chair. So, do you think this is just a flash in the pan? Or will it have a lasting impact? Jonas shrugged. Depends on what Barron does next. If he remains silent, maybe it fades. If he engages, he could set a new tone. Either way, it feels like a turning point. The conversation grew more animated as they speculated whether Barron might become more vocal in the future, maybe even step into public service or activism. Some saw him as a reluctant symbol of a gentler approach to politics. Others doubted he'd take on that role. Later that day, Alice had to stop by a small art gallery she curated in partnership with a local museum. Barron decided to join her. It offered an excuse to get out of the house, and he appreciated the chance to see some new exhibits. The gallery was housed in a historic brick building, the interior painted bright white to contrast with the exposed beams. Guests wandered through, admiring sculptures made from recycled materials and vibrant paintings inspired by modern urban life. The quiet hush of an art space felt like a refuge from the outside uproar. Alice and Barron strolled through the exhibit halls. Occasionally, visitors glanced at Barron with recognition, but no one approached him. Perhaps they sensed he wasn't here for publicity. Near the back of the gallery, they came across Caroline Cho, a journalist working for an arts and culture magazine. She was photographing a new sculpture when she noticed them. Recognizing Alice, Caroline smiled and waved. Alice, nice to see you. And Barron. An unexpected surprise, Caroline greeted warmly. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. It's good to see you too, Caroline, Alice replied. Barron's visiting for a bit. Thought he might enjoy the exhibit. Caroline studied Barron for a moment. I watched the clips from last night's gala, she said softly. I'm not a political reporter, so I don't want to pry. But for what it's worth, I think it's wonderful how you handle things. Barron nodded. Thanks. I appreciate that. She hesitated, then decided to speak carefully. I know you're probably being flooded with requests, but if you ever want to talk in a setting where it's not all about politics, we'd love to hear your perspective on art, culture, or anything you're passionate about. Our magazine tries to feature diverse voices. He considered her offer, surprised by the angle. That's kind of you. I'll keep it in mind. With a polite smile, Caroline resumed her photography. Barron moved on, thinking about how different her demeanor was from Marcus Klein's. Not every journalist hunted for sensational headlines. Some truly wanted to learn, to share stories that mattered. Meanwhile, the main organization that had hosted the gala, the Spencer Silva Foundation, was abuzz with excitement. Located on the 7th floor of a modern office building in the heart of the city, the foundation's suite boasted large windows overlooking the skyline, cheerful murals on the walls, and bright potted plants in the corners. Angela Mathers, the foundation's chief administrator, sat at a round conference table with a group of staff members. They were reviewing the numbers from the night before. Pie charts and spreadsheets filled a large screen mounted on the wall. This is unprecedented, Angela said, her tone a mix of awe and relief. Our initial target for the gala was ambitious, $2 million for this fiscal quarter. But we've exceeded $3.5 million in pledges. A wave of excited chatter spread around the table. The marketing director, Hannah Scott, grinned widely. That means more funds for after-school programs, better nutritional support, and bigger scholarship opportunities. Our waiting list could shrink drastically. A junior staffer named Ethan Hayes piped up. And that's not including the potential matching grants. The coverage from the event is everywhere. We might attract more corporate sponsors now. Angela nodded, leaning forward. We need to capitalize on this momentum in a responsible way. Let's highlight the stories of the kids and families we support. The public's eyes are on us, and that can be a blessing or a curse. We have to make sure the conversation remains about the cause, not about the drama. They all understood she was referring to Marcus Klein's controversial speech and Barron Trump's response. While the foundation certainly didn't plan that confrontation, it couldn't deny the surge in public interest. Now, their challenge was to harness that attention to advance their mission, giving underprivileged children the chance to succeed. By late afternoon, Barron found himself back at Alice's townhouse, this time settled in a reading nook overlooking a small garden. The walls were lined with books, everything from modern bestsellers to art history tomes. He picked up a random volume on sculpture, but found it hard to concentrate. His mind spun with the day's revelations, the invites, the flood of media attention, the philanthropic windfall for the Spencer Silva Foundation. He couldn't help feeling torn between wanting to retreat into anonymity and wanting to stand up for something he believed in, like the well-being of those kids showcased at the gala. Alice entered, carrying a plate of cookies. "These might help you think," she teased, setting them on a side table. He smiled in gratitude. "I keep going in circles," he admitted. "Everyone wants me to do something, go on a show, speak at a conference, even accept awards. That's not really my thing." She lowered herself into a nearby armchair. "No, it's not," she agreed gently. "But sometimes life leads us into roles we never planned for. The question is whether you feel compelled to do more than you initially intended." Barron sighed, picking up a cookie and examining it absently. "Maybe there's a way to support the foundation without becoming a spokesperson in the media. I don't want to overshadow the kids who actually need the attention." Alice leaned forward, her gaze warm. "Then do it on your own terms. The public might be fascinated with you right now, but that doesn't mean you have to do a press tour. You could quietly help expand the foundation's programs, or you could speak behind closed doors with donors who could really make a difference. There are options." He nodded slowly. "I guess so. I just don't want to be seen as capitalizing on my name. That's the last thing I want." Alice patted his arm. "Your name can open doors for others if you use it carefully. It doesn't have to be about you. It can be about the cause." As they spoke, Barron's phone buzzed yet again. He picked it up, bracing himself, and saw a text from an unknown number. Tentatively, he opened it. "Hey, Barron, it's Marcus Klein. Got your number from a mutual acquaintance. I just wanted to let you know I'm publishing an op-ed tomorrow. It's an apology and a reflection on last night. I felt you deserved a heads up. No pressure to respond, just wanted you to know." Barron stared at the screen. It was surprising that Klein had found his number, but not entirely unexpected. Journalists had their ways. More surprising was that Klein gave him a warning, almost a courtesy. "What is it?" Alice asked, noticing his raised eyebrows. He handed her the phone so she could read the message. "It's Marcus Klein," he explained. "Apparently he's writing some sort of reflective piece." Alice read it and handed the phone back. "Well, at least he's being transparent. He could have published it without telling you." Barron sighed. "He probably wants me to see it so I don't get blindsided, or maybe he's trying to salvage his own reputation. Either way, it's a gesture, a small one. Will you respond?" Alice asked. Barron paused. "Not right now. I'll wait to see what he writes. I guess there's no point in getting into a long back and forth." Alice nodded, setting a comforting hand on his shoulder. They both knew that no matter how carefully Barron navigated this, the storm of attention would continue for a while. For someone who had spent years trying to dodge the spotlight, this was uncharted territory. As dusk approached, the townhouse's interior lights gave the place a warm glow. Outside, the street was relatively quiet, a few pedestrians strolling under street lamps. Barron found a sense of calm in watching the windows of neighboring buildings light up, each one a small world of its own. Inside, he and Alice prepared a simple dinner: pasta with fresh tomato sauce, garlic bread, a small salad. The normalcy of the task helped ground him. After they ate, Alice disappeared to handle a few work emails, leaving Barron alone with his thoughts in the living room. The TV was on mute, cycling through images of news anchors, political commentators, and entertainment reporters, all likely discussing the same thing. He glanced at his phone one more time, deciding to check social media briefly. The top trending tags were still #BarronTrump and #CharityGala. One video clip, posted by a major news network, had racked up millions of views. The comments were a chaotic mix of praise, cynicism, political jabs, and heartfelt appreciation for his measured stance. Suddenly, a private message icon appeared on his Instagram. It was from a name he recognized, Ryan Alvarez, a young nonprofit founder who ran an organization helping foster kids find safe, stable homes. Barron remembered hearing about Ryan's work. He was a tireless advocate for child welfare, often overshadowed by bigger charities. "Hey Barron, it's Ryan from Kids First Initiative. We've never met, but I've long admired your mother's anti-bullying campaigns and heard a bit about your interest in youth issues. After seeing that clip from last night, I wondered if you might want to connect. We're always looking for caring individuals who can help amplify our message. No pressure, just thought I'd reach out." Barron smiled faintly. This was exactly the sort of outreach that made him think. Could I use my platform for something more constructive? It wasn't about endorsing or selling anything. It was about real kids in need. He typed a brief but friendly reply, promising to learn more about Ryan's initiative. Then he set his phone aside. For the first time since last night's drama, he felt a sense of direction. Perhaps there was a middle ground, a way to maintain his privacy while also supporting initiatives he believed in. It would require caution and clear boundaries, but it was possible. Shortly before midnight, Barron was lying in bed, reading a novel on his tablet. His thoughts began to drift, heavy with the events of the past day. Just as he was about to power down the device, his phone buzzed. He checked the caller ID, restricted number. His first instinct was to ignore it, but something prompted him to pick up. He tapped accept and put the phone to his ear. A familiar voice came through, cautious yet warm. "Hey, kiddo." Barron's heart skipped a beat. It was his father, Donald Trump. He rarely received calls from him at such a late hour, unless something pressing was on his mind. "Hi," Barron replied, equally cautious. There was a moment of silence on the line. "I want to say I saw the footage of you at that gala," Trump said. Barron could practically picture him sitting at a desk somewhere, phone in hand. "You handled yourself very, very well." Barron paused, uncertain how to respond. Praise from his father wasn't unheard of, but it was usually couched in jokes or references to something else. "Thanks," Barron said. "I just said what I felt." Another brief silence. Then a softer tone. "I'm proud of you. You stood up for yourself, and for a family name, I guess. And you did it with more grace than most people do nowadays." Barron exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. He didn't realize how much he wanted that reassurance until he received it. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. "Look, I know we don't talk much about these things," Trump went on. "But if you ever need anything, support, advice, just pick up the phone. You don't have to do it all alone." Barron swallowed, feeling a swirl of emotions. "Thanks," he managed again, voice tinged with gratitude. "I will." They spoke a few more minutes in generalities about school, about the possibility of Barron traveling soon, about the media coverage. It was, in many ways, a normal conversation, yet for Barron it felt monumental. The call ended on a simple note, each telling the other to take care. Setting the phone aside, Barron stared at the ceiling, contemplating how quickly life could shift. Within 24 hours, he'd gone from quietly attending a charity event to potentially forging a new relationship with his father, earning widespread respect, and considering philanthropic commitments. It was surreal, but also affirming. Eventually, he turned off the light. As he drifted into sleep, one thought stood out. No matter what happens next, dignity remains the choice that guides him. A month had passed since the charity gala at the Fairmont Grand Hotel. Yet the events of that evening still echoed through the city's social and philanthropic circles. The Spencer Silva Foundation had fielded a flood of new donations and pledges, while other charitable organizations reported a general uptick in interest from people inspired by the conversation about respect. Journalists continued to reference the Barron moment in discussions on public discourse. Barron, for his part, had settled into a quieter routine again, mostly focusing on school. At Alice Fordham's townhouse, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. Aside from the occasional camera lurking down the block or a piece of unexpected mail from well-wishers. True to his word, Barron never went on a grand media tour. Instead, he did something else. He began collaborating quietly with Ryan Alvarez from Kids First Initiative and a few other small nonprofits that advocated for underprivileged children. They called their collaboration the Open Doors Project, a modest partnership aiming to connect youth from under-resourced neighborhoods with positive role models in various fields, whether sports, the arts, or technology. Barron never served as the project's public face. He insisted that Ryan and the other advocates keep the spotlight on the kids themselves. Still, he attended planning sessions and contributed ideas on how to engage local businesses and philanthropic individuals. His surname opened doors for them, allowing them to schedule meetings with people who might otherwise ignore smaller nonprofits. And in those meetings, Barron let Ryan and his team do most of the talking. Marcus Klein's personal transformation remained ongoing. His published op-ed, titled An Olive Branch to a Teenager Who Outclassed Me, had garnered mixed reactions. Some readers applauded his vulnerability, others accused him of opportunism. Regardless, he had taken the risk of showing humility. Buoyed by that article's surprisingly positive response, he began writing a weekly column called Reflections on Civility, examining the lines between humor, free speech, and kindness. While he still believed in holding the powerful to account, he now tempered his critiques with genuine empathy, particularly when it came to individuals who had not chosen to be public figures. He also reached out to the Spencer Silva Foundation, offering to highlight their work in a follow-up piece. The foundation's staff, initially wary, eventually agreed on the condition that he focus on the children's stories. The resulting article spotlighted the daily challenges faced by disadvantaged youth and celebrated the people committed to helping them. Halfway through that month, the dean of a nearby university invited Barron to deliver a brief keynote at an annual student leadership conference. Although speaking engagements were still rolling in, this one stood out because it focused on the same demographic Barron was quietly trying to help: young people figuring out how to shape their future in a sometimes harsh world. Barron wrestled with the decision. Part of him wanted to maintain his low profile. Another part saw an opportunity to share a positive message. After conferring with Ryan Alvarez and Alice, he ultimately agreed, on one condition: that several youth speakers for various charitable programs would join him on stage. He refused to be a solo headliner. On the appointed evening, the university's grand auditorium was nearly full. A hush descended as a student MC introduced the event, praising the Open Doors Project and the partner nonprofits. Then it was Barron's turn. Stepping onto the stage, he paused before the microphone, scanning the faces of hundreds of students, diverse in background, passions, and ambitions. Clad in a simple blazer, he still radiated the quiet poise that had caught everyone's attention a month earlier. He didn't have a teleprompter or even note cards, just a few thoughts he'd organized in his head. "Thank you for inviting me," he began, voice resonating through the hall. "I'm not here as a public figure or a politician. I'm here because, like many of you, I'm still learning how to navigate a world that can be inspiring and discouraging in equal measure." He spoke about the power of words, how they can unite people across different viewpoints or drive them further apart. He recounted the importance of focusing on causes rather than personalities, reminding everyone that behind every headline, there's a human being. At one point, Barron invited Erica, a 16-year-old artist from a low-income neighborhood, to share her story of finding a local mentor through the Open Doors Project. Then Noah, an aspiring software developer, explained how a sponsored scholarship offered him the chance to attend summer coding programs. By the time they finished, the crowd seemed electrified, not by any celebrity aura, but by the tangible impact that ordinary people could make in each other's lives. Barron wrapped up with a measured statement. "I didn't choose my last name, but I can choose how I use it. We all have some sort of platform. Our voices, our networks, our relationships. And we have a responsibility to use them in a way that respects others. Real strength isn't always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it's the willingness to stand still, to listen, and to speak quietly but truthfully." The applause began, soft at first, then rising to a standing ovation. Yet Barron's gaze remained on Erica and Noah, thanking them with a subtle nod for being brave enough to share their experiences. It felt right that they were at the center of the moment. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, Barron lingered in the auditorium's lobby. Posters about campus clubs and student-led charities lined the walls. Most of the attendees had drifted away, and the custodial staff were collecting stray programs and cups. Suddenly, Barron spotted a familiar figure near the entrance. It was Donald Trump, flanked by a single security aide. Barron's father had chosen to arrive unannounced, presumably wanting to avoid overshadowing the event. Dressed in a subdued suit, he offered his son a nod of greeting. "You did good up there," Donald said, voice low yet unmistakably proud. Barron smiled, a tinge of warmth reflecting in his eyes. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to make it." Trump shrugged. "You don't always have to see me, but I'm paying attention." They didn't hug or engage in any grand display of affection. Instead, they simply walked side by side toward the exit, father and son. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic reconciliation. It was just another small step toward a more authentic understanding between them. Over the following weeks, the media frenzy around Barron's confrontation with Marcus Klein finally began to wane. Another wave of controversies, political battles, celebrity scandals, commanded the public's short attention span. Yet a quiet legacy remained. Those who had watched the gala incident unfold and seen Barron's subsequent choices walked away with a shared lesson. Words carry immense power. They can be weapons of division or instruments of compassion. Respect is never wasted. Even when dealing with people who oppose or mock us, dignity can defuse tension more effectively than a barrage of insults. Private citizens, especially children, deserve a baseline of empathy. Fame or family connections shouldn't negate one's right to be treated as a person rather than a symbol. Choice matters. We cannot always control the spotlights turned on us, but we can control how we respond to them. The moral of this story, therefore, isn't merely that Barron Trump took a stand against an abrasive journalist. It's a broader, cautionary tale. In an age when rapid-fire commentary and outrage can overshadow genuine dialogue, a single moment of poise can ripple outward. It can inspire people from vastly different backgrounds to reconsider how they engage with one another. On a quiet evening, Barron sat with Alice in her townhouse's living room. They sipped tea as autumn winds rustled the trees outside. The day had been busy, meetings, classes, and coordinating with the Open Doors Project, but now there was peace. He shared a modest smile. "I'm glad things are settling down," he said, voice tinged with relief. "I never wanted to be in the headlines. But if that brief moment helped a few kids get a better chance in life, I think it was worth it." Alice nodded, setting her cup down. "You reminded us all of something important. We always have the power to choose dignity. And when we do, others notice, and sometimes they choose it too." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, the city lights flickered against the night sky. Inside that softly lit room, Barron felt an unspoken sense of closure. Not an end to all difficulties or controversies, but a resolve that, whatever came next, he would meet it on his terms, calmly, steadily, and with respect. Though the cameras would inevitably pop up again, and provocateurs would always find new angles, he had learned something profound. Staying true to one's core values is not only possible, but transformative, even in a world that seems designed to tear us down. With that simple knowledge, Barron closed his eyes and let the moment linger. Outside, the wind died down, and the city carried on, perhaps a fraction gentler than before, thanks to a young man who had once quietly reminded everyone that real strength lies in empathy and dignity, and that, in the end, our words shape the world around us more than we ever realize.